What is the fastest quilt in the world? It's a whole cloth quilt, and what we do is we just take two large pieces of fabric and quilt them together. It's genius. A whole cloth quilt is absolutely perfect for that favorite fabric you haven't wanted to cut up, and for me that's always Christmas fabric. I love all the Christmas designs, they're just so beautiful. So today I'm excited to show you how to make a whole cloth quilt using Christmas fabric. Of course you can use any fabric you like. So to get started, give your fabric a good press and then I'll show you what to do next. You can find a copy of these cutting instructions over on my website. I'll put a link in the description below. The first thing we need to do is baste our quilt, and to do that we need a nice big flat surface. Now one place to do that is the floor, but I find it really difficult to crawl around on the floor, so it's not my first preference. What I'm going to use is my dining table here. Now it is a little bit small, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to baste half of it and then move it up and then baste the second half. Alternatively, you might like to go to a library or a community centre or a church if they've got a nice big table you can use. But for now, I'm just going to make do with my dining table. Now I've got my backing fabric here and I've got the right side facing down. It's called Peppermint Parade. It's super cute. So the wrong side is facing me. Whoop, and you can see it wanting to slide off the table. So to prevent that, we're going to stick it down with some masking or some painter's tape. Now we'd usually do this anyway when we're basting a quilt. My table is not super special. Well, actually it is super special because we've had it for a very long time, but it's not precious. So I can safely put this on my table and not worry about it pulling up varnish or anything, because this table's been through quite a few wars. I shared about it in a newsletter recently. A better place might be maybe your kitchen island if it's marble, because then of course you won't damage the surface. So if you are using a dining table, just make sure that you're not going to be damaging that surface. Then I'm just going to tape around the top as well. Now we want it smoothed out, and how do we want it? We don't want it really taut, we just want it smoothed out really nicely. So for example, when we take the tape off, it's not going to spring back into shape. If it does that, we know we've taped it too tightly. So there we have the fabric all taped down just nice and smoothly. Now I'm going to get my batting and lay that on top. So for the batting, we want it at least the same size, if not slightly bigger than our fabric. Now I'm using Palon's natural cotton batting, and I've used the crib size, which is absolutely perfect for this. The crib size measures 45 inches by 60 inches, so it's just perfect for this project. I'm just going to place it on top and then smooth it out. Okay, so again, we just want it smoothed out. We don't want to be pulling at the batting, and I want about the same extra or overhang on either side. Now it is a little bit tight. Some people like to have a little bit more batting than that. So if you're not comfortable with only having, let's say, 1.5 inches spare on either side, you could just buy a bigger piece and use that. So I'm just smoothing it out. And then when I'm happy, what I'm going to do is just fold this piece up, and then I'm going to fold it back, and we're just going to give it a really light spray. So I'm going to kind of half spray baste and half pin baste, because I usually pin, but I think spray basting is something I want to get used to, but I'm not fully trusting it yet. I hope that makes sense. So you could either spray baste, pin baste, or kind of use a little bit of both, which is what I'm going to do today. So I'm using Older 505 temporary adhesive spray for this. I'm just going to give it a really light once over. I've only used it once before, I think, in a project, and I used way too much, and everyone commented, you used way too much. So let's see if I can do it a little bit better this time. It's just meant to create just a really nice tacky, tacky adhesive? I don't know. Anyway, I think I've probably used a bit too much again, but I don't see dark spots, which last time I used so much, I got dark spots. So I'm just going to roll this down, and then we'll smooth it out. And I'm just going to go and do a little bit at the top. So now I've got the fabric that I'd like to be the top of my quilt, and I'm going to place it on top with the right sides up and also with the direction in the correct direction. I know the peppermints are facing me, and now this really cute fabric called Christmas Eve is also facing me in the right direction. So what we want to do is place it as best we can so it's perfectly on top of the fabric that's underneath. Now it is a little bit hard because we've got our batting on top, but I know that it's going to be centered in the middle of my batting and about an inch down from my tabletop there. So I'll just get that smoothed out. Okay, isn't that print just adorable? So once I've got it smoothed out nicely, we don't want it too perfect just yet, I'm going to carefully fold up my fabric, and really carefully, because of course we've given this a really nice press and we want it to stay nicely pressed, just rolling it up like that so that I can do my glue again. Now I think the idea of the glue is for it just to sort of tack the fabric together. It's not going to be like a glue and adhered, and I think that's where I've gone wrong in the past because that's what I've expected. So I'm just going to roll that down just like that, smooth it out. That's looking awesome. And then I will just do that top bit again. So if you're like me and a little bit nervous, or if you are just pin basting anyway, it's at this point that you would use the pins. Now, if you didn't use the glue, the batting is kind of sticky anyway. I can't really explain it, but it sort of does stick to the fabric and hold it all in place. So you can pin baste it, but I would just still tape it down because it's just that bottom layer that can just move around and not sit perfectly flat. But if you look at my fabric here, it's just looking absolutely beautiful because it kind of sticks to the batting as it is. So I have spray basted it. I will just pop in a few pins, just a few, as a backup. And by all means, leave a comment and let me know if this is not necessary. But I have always been a pin baster, so I find it really nerve-wracking using just the spray baste. So I've really only put in a few here, probably not even a dozen over half of the quilt top here. So now what I'm going to do is just carefully remove the tape, and then we're going to move our quilt so we can do the same to the bottom. Okay, so now just shimmering it down, and I'll just stop right there because I don't want the weight of it to then drag it over to the bottom of the table. I'm just going to lift this up, and then I'm just going to tape down the backing again, trying my best not to disturb the rest of it too much. I'll fold it up to about here. I can see my pins are there, which is kind of handy. And I better pop some tape in because I feel like it's about to go whoop off the table. So I do know that people like the pull noodle method. I've never tried that, but if you have, let me know in the comments how you find it, if it's useful. I'd love to hear from you. Okay, so that looks pretty nicely smoothed out. And I think the glue is just stopping right there, which is perfect. So what I'm going to do is just slightly spray this, roll down the batting, smooth it out, spray again, and then roll down the quilt top and smooth that out, and then pop a couple of pins in. So just a note, when you're rolling it up, roll up the fabric and then the batting, because that's how we're going to glue it, and it will work much easier for you and be an easier process. Okay, so now I'll just remove that tape and we have basted our quilt. So now we're ready to quilt our whole cloth quilt. That's a bit of a tongue twister. And you can do that however you like. You know, I'm a big fan of just straight line quilting. You could take your ruler and just mark it with a washable marker or some chalk. You could just really quilt this however you like. But something I did for a whole cloth quilt that I made about 15 years ago, which I thought was super cute, was I quilted it with hearts. Now it does take a minute to quilt all those hearts, but boy does it look cute when it's done. So what I did was I found the center of the quilt, whoop, and I can see a runaway pin right there. I just want to find the center, so I'm just going to fold it in half like that. Fold it in half again and just give the center a real pinch so I know where it is. Then I'm going to open it back up. I can see it's right there. And that's where I'm going to start my first heart quilt. So it's a quilted heart design. So I've got a template here. I'm just going to pop that right on top, right in the center, and that's where I'm going to start. And then I'm just going to go out and across and then do rows one at a time. Like I said, it's going to take me a while, but it's going to look super cute. And if you'd like to quilt yours with hearts as well, I will put a free copy of the template over on my website. I'll put a link down below for you and you can get that absolutely free. Of course, you could just draw a heart and quilt it however you like. So I'm just going to take some chalk and draw around my heart, and it's right in the middle there. Now it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, because there are no quilting police coming along to check how you've quilted it or your hearts. So I'm just doing my first heart there. And then what I'm going to do is just take my ruler, because although there are no quilting police, I do like things straight. And I'm just going to start on this side actually, because I've got the salvage here to check that my ruler is straight up against, lining up the bottom of that heart. And then I think I can fit 2 more in on each side. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just quickly grab a second ruler so I can measure the width in between and make sure they're nice and straight. And then I will draw a whole row at a time. So I've got my smaller ruler here and it's 2.5 inches wide. So I'm just going to pop that in between the heart that I just drew and my next heart and trace around my heart there. And I'll repeat this until I've got hearts going all the way across. Remembering I'm just showing you what I'm doing. You do not have to do hearts. You can quilt yours however you'd like. So just doing the hearts on the second side, again, I'm lining up the edge of my ruler on the selvage and the edge of my ruler on the bottom of that heart. I'm going to take this ruler so that there's 2.5 inches between each heart, take my template, place it right next to it, and then trace it. So once I've finished quilting that first row, I will take my hearts and do the next row. And what I'll do is I'll stagger them. So I've got one heart here, one heart here. Well, the next heart will go in the middle. I'll find the top of the hearts and then I'll start that heart right in the middle of the 2 of them, right on that line at the top of that heart. So the top and the bottom of the hearts will all line up too. I'm up to my last heart and I absolutely love it. Is it perfect? No, but do I love it? Yes, it's taken me a minute. Now my top tip is when you're sewing those hearts, I'm just going to come down to the bottom point there, when you get to that bottom point, what I've been doing is reducing my stitch length all the way down to 0, doing a stitch and then turning, because what I find is sometimes it skips that stitch over, and instead of getting a nice point, you kind of get it stitched down, across and over. So by doing that, it just means you get a really nice point. So I'm just going to go 1 stitch forward on that 0, change it back to the, it's closer to 3 than 2, but a little bit more than 2.5, and then I will carry on. I've just been taking it really slow and just enjoying the process. So once we've finished our quilting, the next thing I'm going to do is I will give it a quick press, and then we're going to square it off. So now we need to square up our quilt, and we need to keep an eye on underneath and make sure we're cutting off the selvages and such on the back as well. You can see I'm probably about 1/4 of an inch off on the back. The backing is set back about 1/4 of an inch. I've got to be careful of that. And I'm just going to find a straight line on this edge that looks really straight to me, and then I'm just going to do my best guess at getting a nice straight line there, and I'll cut, and I'll go around the whole quilt top so I have all my edges cut nice and straight, just like we would any other quilt. The only thing is we do have these selvages underneath that we need to make sure we're getting rid of. So let me just get the next side. That first cut is always the hardest. And now we've got that cut, we've got a nice straight line here to work from. So like I said, I'm just going to carry on around all 4 sides, cutting it nice and straight. It's a bit wonky here. So I've decided I'm going to round the corners off on my quilt corners because I really love the way it looks. It makes a quilt look really fresh and modern. And because our whole cloth quilt is such a simple design, it's just going to add another dimension to it. So all I'm going to do is take a plate, and of course you don't have to do this. I'm just showing you what I'm doing to my quilt. I'm going to line up the plate so it's nice and even on both sides here. Then I'm just going to take my washable marker and trace around the edge of that plate so I've got a nice rounded corner. Then I'm just going to take my scissors and carefully cut around the line that I've just drawn. Just like that. Now I'll repeat that for all 4 corners. And then what I am going to do, it's a new thing that I've started doing, is I am just going to do a stitch right next to the edge of my quilt just to keep all my layers together nicely, and then I'm going to bind my quilt. So now I'm going to attach my binding, and just a few notes on it. If you do want to do rounded corners, you do need to make bias binding, which means your fabric is cut on the bias, and I've got a video for that. I'll put a link down below. I'm not going to do a tutorial right now on how I attach my binding. I'm just going to show you how I do it in fast forward. I've got a whole heap of very detailed videos, and I'll put links down below for you. But I will just quickly explain it. What I like to do is sew it on from the back, flip it over, and then sew it down on the front. And then we also do a sleeve technique for the ends, so we're not joining our ends on the diagonal, which can be a little bit tricky. If you're enjoying this video, please do subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss out on another video. It really helps me out and I appreciate it so much. So here's the finished quilt. Ta-da! And guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to remember to show you the back. Everyone always says, you forgot to show us the back. Can you see the heart quilts? Or the quilted hearts? Isn't that cute? What do you think? And what do you think of my rounded corners? I love them. I think it just adds a little bit more detail and interest to a whole cloth quilt. So I hope you like this whole cloth quilt tutorial. Don't forget you can get my free heart template over on my website. I'll put the links down below. And if you've got some favorite fabric you've already got planned that you're going to use, let me know in the comments what it is. I'd love to hear. And for my binding, I think it's a really nice, easy way of doing your binding. If you'd like to see that in more detail, I'm going to put the link above for you. Thanks so much for joining me and watching the video to the very end. I really appreciate you.